They thought I was invisible. At my sister-in-law's wedding, dressed in designer silk they assumed was borrowed, I stood 3 rows back, holding my champagne like a servant. Then my father-in-law raised his glass, smiled at the crowd, and said, "Some people take and give nothing back. They'll inherit nothing." Everyone turned to me. I didn't flinch. I had signed the paperwork a week ago. The venue? Mine. The catering company? Also mine. And the man who just humiliated me? I bought his debt last month. I wasn't the girl in the corner. I was the architect of their collapse, and tonight I would begin. They called it the wedding of the decade. White roses imported from Ecuador, a 7-tier cake encrusted with edible gold, and guests dressed like royalty. And I wore a custom silk gown I had flown in from Milan, but no one noticed. Not because it wasn't stunning, but because no one looked. Not truly. I was introduced 3 times that evening as Thomas's guest. Not wife, not partner, just a placeholder. Amanda, my sister-in-law, floated across the room like a celebrity bride, flashing rehearsed gratitude at every compliment, yet somehow always finding time to glance my way with veiled disdain. The photographers never asked me to join group shots. I wasn't given a seat with the family. Instead, I was placed at a distant table, nestled between the florist's assistant and a cousin from Omaha who hadn't seen Thomas in 15 years. The message was clear. I was not one of them. Thomas didn't object. He barely noticed. He spent most of the night shaking hands, posing for pictures, and retelling the story of how he and Amanda had helped rebuild the family empire, a narrative that conveniently excluded the millions I injected into their failing real estate portfolio 2 years ago. Every time his eyes met mine, they slid past like I was part of the decor. Dinner was served late. The first course was announced with orchestral flair, and a hush fell over the room as servers glided through the aisles. I raised my champagne flute to sip, and that's when it happened. My father-in-law, Robert Grant, Texas oil tycoon turned political donor, rose from his table, tapped his glass, and demanded the room's attention. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, voice steady, smile practiced, "tonight is about love, family, and legacy." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Amanda reached for his arm, eyes sparkling. "But legacy," he continued, "is not something we hand out lightly. It's earned, it's protected, and it's reserved for those who carry our name with honor and purpose." I felt it before he said it. A stillness in my chest, a silence only I could hear. "There are some," he said, his gaze pausing on me for just long enough to make it sting, "who come into this family expecting everything, but they give nothing back. And to them, I say this, you will receive nothing." The room laughed, some uncomfortably, others sincerely. Thomas didn't flinch. Amanda smirked. My fork hovered mid-air. I smiled, not the kind of smile that hides pain, the kind that signals preparation. I took another sip of champagne and lowered my gaze, as though embarrassed. They believed what they wanted to believe, that I was small, dependent, irrelevant. But in my purse, tucked between a lipstick and a silk handkerchief, was a manila envelope. Inside it, a signed agreement transferring full control of the family's newest hotel project to a shell corporation, a corporation I controlled. The paperwork had been signed by Robert himself, months ago in a deal he thought too good to resist. Funny how desperation blurs judgment. They didn't know the catering company serving this wedding was one of my holdings, or that the event planner worked under a firm I acquired 6 months prior. They didn't know the venue itself, this grand marble estate they so proudly showcased, was on a 30-year lease. To me. Their names were on the banners, but the ink on every check came from my accounts. I watched Amanda bask in her moment, standing beneath the chandelier, oblivious, her makeup perfect, her lies even more so. She'd spent years treating me like a poor imitation of refinement, unaware that her bridal suite was being cleaned by staff on my payroll. As the speeches ended and music swelled again, I excused myself quietly and stepped into the corridor. I pulled the envelope from my purse, opened it, and studied Robert's signature one more time. Neat, sharp, unwitting. I didn't need to destroy them tonight. I just needed to remind myself that I could. They thought I was here just to decorate their photographs. They were wrong. I was here to dismantle their legacy, one legally binding signature at a time. 3 years before Amanda's wedding, I sat in a secondhand cafe in Prague with a woman who never gave me her real name. She wore gray, spoke in code, and passed me a flash drive with more power than any title in the Grant family ever would. On it were blueprints, shell company templates, and backdoor access to a web of financial pathways designed to make anyone invisible, yet entirely in control. I didn't need their name. I was building something far more potent, the ability to own without being seen. Within 6 months, I'd launched 5 investment vehicles across multiple jurisdictions: Singapore, Cayman, British Virgin Islands. On paper, they looked like quiet partners in boutique ventures. In reality, they were pipelines feeding directly into the veins of the Grant Empire. Thomas had introduced me to his father as someone with minor finance experience, a phrase that made me smile every time I approved a 7-figure transfer into one of Robert's distressed assets. He thought I was helping. In truth, I was rewiring the entire system, rewriting the inheritance that had been promised to his children long before I existed. I didn't just want a seat at the table. I wanted the plumbing beneath it, the screws that held it up, and the blueprint they'd long since forgotten how to read. Robert's empire, though dressed in prestige, was leaking. His arrogance hid his desperation. Amanda's obsession with status masked the rot beneath. And Thomas, well, he was just along for the ride, smiling in front of cameras while I kept their kingdom from collapsing. They never once asked where the capital came from. Not once. Every deal went through a maze so complex even Robert's auditors couldn't trace it. Each quarterly dividend that showed up in his account was the result of my silent orchestration. I gave them lifelines disguised as opportunities, then looped those lifelines back through entities I controlled. The family thought they were rising again, but they weren't climbing. They were being carried, and I knew carried things can be dropped. By the time Amanda sent out wedding invitations, I had quietly acquired majority shares in 3 of the family's cornerstone properties: the downtown high-rise, the private retreat in Aspen, and the very hotel where her wedding was held. Not through one transaction, but a dozen micro-acquisitions layered through foreign entities, each legally clean and utterly traceable, to no one they knew. What's more, Robert had unknowingly signed off on the final share transfer of the event venue while securing a bridge loan for Amanda's dress fittings and venue upgrades. His collateral? A set of minority shares he never realized had compounded out of his control. I had no reason to humiliate them publicly. Not yet. Power is best wielded quietly until it isn't. What they also didn't know was that the people they dismissed daily, the valet driver who overheard Thomas's conversations, the assistant who fetched Amanda's couture fittings, the maid who swept up after Robert's cigar sessions, were all on my payroll. It started with small things: an extra check here, a scholarship fund there, a discreet job offer during a moment of stress. Within months, I had a network, not spies, allies, witnesses, human recorders of everything the Grants thought happened behind closed doors. Amanda once berated the pastry chef so viciously he quit mid-shift. I rehired him under my event firm and had him cater her bridal shower. He added salt to the frosting. She never noticed, but the guests did. Robert once ranted about immigrants ruining tradition to his driver. The driver, a U.S. Army veteran and my longtime friend, recorded the conversation. I still haven't decided what to do with it. Thomas? He once bragged about using foundation funds to buy jewelry for someone who actually matters. The purchase was routed through a charity account. I've kept the receipts. But evidence is like wine. It matures with time, and that time was coming. In the days leading up to the wedding, I had my team test the final phase of what we called the aperture. It was a data leak protocol designed to look like an accidental oversight, one that would release internal emails, financial transfers, and sensitive correspondence between Robert and several political donors. What made it perfect? The emails appeared to come from Robert's own account. We didn't forge them. We simply restructured the headers. Technically, nothing illegal. Ethically, that was up to the audience. The document was set to be delivered to 3 media outlets via anonymous drop, triggered by a single command from my phone. That command? A simple phrase buried in a calendar event. Cake arrives. I set the reminder for 7:45 p.m. on Amanda's wedding night. She chose that time herself during a tasting I never attended. The irony was exquisite. I walked through the reception hall, smiling at the guests who saw me but didn't see me. My dress swayed as I passed waiters I employed and guests I funded. I didn't need their recognition. I already had their signatures. I already owned their silence. And in 15 minutes, I'd own the narrative. There's a particular cruelty in discovering your husband is cheating on you with your past, not a stranger, not a model or an intern or a woman plucked from obscurity. No. Thomas chose Vanessa King, once a rising tech star, now a scandal-shrouded strategist hiding behind boutique consulting gigs and charm. The same Vanessa who, 7 years ago, had sold me a faulty algorithm, undercut my launch, and triggered the series of losses that collapsed my first company. I'd forgiven her then. Or so I thought. Life had moved on, and I'd buried the failure like an old scar, until it walked back into my life wearing red lipstick and my husband's cufflinks. It started with a charge on a joint card, $4,200 at a gallery in Soho. Thomas never liked art. Then came a dinner for 2 in Miami. During a weekend, I was in D.C. handling a silent acquisition. 1 transaction might have been a mistake. 10 were a pattern. By the time I opened the private folder on his cloud drive, password Amanda 2020, I wasn't surprised. There they were, photos, messages, gifts, all of it, paid for with dividends from a trust I'd structured. He was using my money to impress a woman who once destroyed me. I stared at the screen for a long time, not crying, not screaming, just recalibrating. I had built Thomas, crafted the version of him that his family tolerated, polished his image, trained his posture, even corrected his grammar in the early days. And now, this man, who owed his lifestyle, career, and credibility to my ghost architecture, had handed it to a woman who knew only how to burn. I didn't leave him that night. I didn't even mention it. That would have made it too easy. You don't detonate a foundation without clearing the field. So I smiled, kissed his cheek, and asked if he wanted to join me in Aspen that weekend. He declined. "Busy with board stuff," he said. I had other plans anyway. The merger was already in motion. Months earlier, I'd begun merging one of my silent investment entities with a boutique analytics firm that specialized in due diligence audits. Publicly, it was framed as an AI initiative. Privately, it was a fact-finding mission with one target: Thomas Grant. The numbers didn't lie. Hidden accounts, shell invoices, misappropriated marketing funds rerouted to personal expenses, and then the real jewel, an internal memo from Vanessa, advising Thomas on how to shift phantom line items to international holding firms to obscure tax responsibility. It was ambitious, it was reckless, and it was illegal. Perfect. 2 days after Amanda's wedding, the Grant Foundation scheduled its quarterly board meeting. The family insisted on conducting it in their private lounge downtown, an over-decorated room with leather chairs and legacy portraits. I wore black, not mourning, authority. Thomas greeted me with a kiss on the cheek and that smirk he thought was charming. "Glad you made time," he said, as if the foundation's survival didn't depend on my compliance. I took my seat, pulled out my tablet, waited. The agenda was simple. Vote on a new expansion strategy, approve end-of-quarter disbursements, and review minor discrepancies flagged by the auditors. discrepancies I had curated. When the head of finance began presenting the inconsistencies, Thomas shifted in his seat. When the names on the account started to sound familiar, his jaw locked. And when Vanessa's consulting firm appeared on the expenditure list with no formal contract, he stood. "This is ridiculous," he said. "This is a setup." I didn't look at him. I looked at the board. "Thomas," I said softly, "you'll have an opportunity to respond when the audit is complete. But as interim director, I'm moving for an immediate vote to suspend your authority pending investigation." Robert opened his mouth to protest, but his counsel whispered something into his ear, likely about the risk of liability. Amanda stared at me like she'd seen a ghost. Maybe she had. The vote passed, 5-1. Thomas stormed out. He didn't yell. He didn't beg. He just looked at me with something I hadn't seen in years, realization. That I'd never been the accessory. I'd been the architect. And he'd just been a placeholder. Later that evening, I walked into the server room of my private office. I looked at the backup drive that held every piece of evidence. Then I looked at the calendar. We weren't done. The board would investigate, sure. But the media hadn't caught wind. Not yet. That would come next. But for now, I gave myself a gift. I erased the folder labeled Vanessa K. Not to forgive, just to forget, because she no longer mattered. I watched the screen as the files disappeared. Chong Toy? No, just a temporary hire in a long-term strategy. 2 weeks after the boardroom fallout, my name appeared on documents it was never supposed to touch. Title deeds, stock ownership transfers, executive appointments. I didn't forge anything. I didn't threaten or coerce. I just activated what had been in motion for 3 years. The quiet coup written in fine print and binding signatures. Robert had signed most of it himself, through desperation, through arrogance, through assumptions that no woman would know how to hide leverage inside generosity. The lawyers I hired, under aliases and faceless firms, had played the long game. One clause in a merger, one line in a debt restructuring, one forgotten amendment in a limited partnership agreement. Together they formed a noose, and when I tugged, everything gave way. By the end of the fiscal quarter, I legally held controlling interest in 80% of the Grant family's tangible assets: commercial real estate, hospitality ventures, media stakes, and dormant land portfolios. It wasn't just money, it was power, visibility, legacy. And with a single board vote, I rebranded the holding company. Grant and Legacy became Morgan Atlas Group. It was subtle, elegant, ruthless. The first step was personnel. Every executive, advisor, and consultant who had ever smirked when I walked into a room was quietly dismissed. Some were offered buyouts. Some left without a word. I didn't embarrass them. That wasn't the point. The point was silence, precision, consequence. Robert tried to call. Then he tried to sue. The first got blocked by my assistant. The second got laughed out of court. He'd signed away his rights in a clause buried under a temporary liquidity provision. Amanda threatened to expose me online. I let her. The post got 12 likes and 1 comment. "Isn't she your boss now?" Thomas moved out of our shared penthouse before I asked him to. His keycard stopped working 2 days later. The press didn't catch on. Not at first, because I didn't grandstand. I didn't pose for Forbes. I didn't give TED Talks. I just executed, quietly, with discipline. The kind of discipline no one expected from the woman who once stood in the back row of a wedding she helped fund. But then I planned a new event, a private gathering. High profile, exclusive, same venue, same marble floors, same chandelier Amanda had handpicked from Italy. But this time, no wedding dress. No flower girl, no family drama, or so they thought. The invitation read, "In celebration of transitions, transparency, and truth." I sent it to every donor, investor, politician, and media executive who had ever shaken Robert's hand. I included a few from Amanda's circle, just for taste, and I made sure the press got wind of it. Just enough to send photographers, but not enough to raise suspicion. When they arrived, they found the venue transformed. Modern, minimal, immaculate. No excessive opulence, just sharp lighting and cleaner lines. The speeches began on time. The wine was paired properly, and I stood center stage, wearing a navy suit tailored in London and a calmness no one could quite read. I thanked them for coming. I praised the contributions of the past. Then I began to speak about the future. But instead of strategy or forecasts, I played clips. A slideshow, voices, documents, Robert's tirades, Amanda's manipulation of donation funds, Thomas's double dealing, internal emails, audio recordings. Line by line, I laid out the rot beneath the polish. Not with vengeance, with clarity, like a surgeon explaining a diagnosis. You could hear breaths catch. Glasses clinked uneasily. Phones were silenced, but hands gripped tightly. This, I said, is not revenge, it's transparency. A few people stood to leave, but most stayed. Some leaned forward, a few even nodded. Then I smiled, stepped aside, and revealed the new plaque mounted on the wall behind me. Morgan Atlas Center for Ethical Enterprise. And below it, smaller letters, in place of what once was. I looked into the cameras, into their lenses, into their future reports and recaps and sound bites, and I said it clearly. This is my wedding gift to Amanda, and to every institution that confused inheritance with immunity. Success doesn't feel like victory when no one is there to witness it with love. After the event, headlines flooded the media. Rachel Morgan dismantles dynasty. The quiet revolutionaire, bride turned boss. Investors were intrigued. Boards respected me. Politicians started returning my calls faster than ever. And yet my phone was quieter than it had ever been. I hadn't expected gratitude, but I hadn't expected silence either. Friends I had once mentored unfollowed me. Invitations to charity galas disappeared. Whispered conversations at networking events stopped when I entered a room. To them, I wasn't the woman who built an empire from shadows. I was the cautionary tale of what happens when a woman stops smiling and starts steering. In private, it felt worse. My mornings were filled with reports, approvals, decisions. My nights were void. Empty apartments, cold sheets. I had fired the last assistant who dared to ask if I was okay. I told myself I was fine, that I'd chosen this. But some nights, when the screens dimmed and the air felt still, I heard nothing but my own breath, and I hated its rhythm. There were no trophies, just transaction receipts and silence. The world called me dangerous, and I started to believe them. Because I wasn't angry anymore. I was tired, exhausted. I had climbed the mountain, yes, but left pieces of myself behind on every ledge. One morning, I sat in my office and stared at the mirror in the corner, the one my decorator insisted would open up the space. What I saw was a woman in command, yes, but also one who looked edited, polished, past recognition. I whispered aloud, "Do you even like her?" No one answered. That was when the first alert came in. A small ping from my cybersecurity team, a failed login attempt, nothing major. I brushed it off. The second alert came 2 hours later, then 15 more over the next day, different IPs, different time zones. They were probing my system, not like amateurs, but professionals. Precise. Patient. Then, one broke through. It wasn't catastrophic at first, just a breach in an old archive, a vault of acquisition memos and old emails. But the pattern was clear. They weren't looking for money. They were looking for leverage, history, skeletons. Within 48 hours, every financial dashboard I had was unstable. Transfers were delayed, passwords rejected, access denied. Even my internal comms were compromised. My team panicked. I didn't, not yet. Then I received the message. It wasn't through email, it was handwritten, left on the leather chair in my private office. No one had seen who placed it, no cameras had caught it. The envelope was cream, the handwriting neat, the message short. You forgot who taught Robert the art of empire and who taught Amanda how to watch. I read it 3 times before the meaning clicked. She wasn't dead. Elaine Grant, Robert's first wife, Amanda's mother, Thomas's estranged matriarch. Everyone believed she'd died in a boating accident 15 years ago. The body was never found, but a memorial was built and tears were cried. What no one realized was that Elaine had never truly disappeared. She had simply stepped back, into the shadows, into the system. And I had walked right into her game. I remembered now. A firm I had dealt with during an early acquisition. The name of a partner I'd never met but who signed every document with elegance. An advisor who vanished just before I closed a major deal. The patterns were all there. I just hadn't looked close enough. Elaine had been a ghost in the architecture, and now she was here to reclaim it. The next week was war. Digital fire, proxy battles, anonymous leaks of my strategies to competitors, smear campaigns built with surgical precision. My stock price dipped. Investors called. The board demanded answers, and I gave them none, because I didn't have any. The more I fought, the faster it unraveled. Foundations I thought were unshakable began to collapse. Contracts were challenged, legal claims filed, executives turned cold. One by one, my carefully laid assets were snatched away, redirected or buried under countersuits and investigations. Then came the final blow. One of my personal accounts, secure, offshore, untouched by public systems, was emptied, not by brute force, by permission. A signature I had once given to a woman posing as a silent partner, a woman I now knew as Elaine. She had waited, watched, and when I had cleared the battlefield of every other opponent, she stepped forward. I stood in the middle of my office, lights flickering, systems failing, and whispered a laugh I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't bitter, it was real. Because for the first time in years, I wasn't calculating. I wasn't spinning or orchestrating or predicting. I had nothing. And in that void, I felt something shocking, relief. No more secrets, no more performances, no more war rooms and silent battles, just air, just space. They thought they'd broken me, but you can't break what's already been rebuilt a dozen times over. I walked to the window, looked out at the skyline I'd once ruled. It didn't belong to me anymore. And strangely, that was okay. Elaine had won this round, but I was no longer in her game. And for the first time in years, I could finally choose my own. The airport was nearly empty when I boarded. No cameras, no last-minute phone calls, just the soft shuffle of my boots against the boarding bridge and the low hum of jet engines preparing to lift me away from everything I'd once conquered. My name on the manifest wasn't Rachel Morgan. It hadn't been for weeks. The identity was new, but the woman behind it was ancient, reborn, not erased. Iceland greeted me with silence, a quiet I hadn't known in decades, the kind of silence that wasn't absence, but clarity. I rented a cabin just outside Akureyri, nestled between frozen hills and the persistent whisper of the wind. There were no towers, no meetings, no legacy to manage or defend, just air, just breath. I had walked away from billions, from influence, from headlines and battlegrounds. Some called it running. I called it cleansing. At first, I did nothing. Slept. Walked. Ate simple meals. Watched snow gather on windowsills like time, folding in on itself. My hands, once constantly typing, signing, calculating, grew still. I listened to them, wondering if they remembered how to build something not made of contracts or shares. Then one evening, a knock came. A girl, maybe 20, Scandinavian accent, big eyes, nervous hands. She said she'd been told, quietly, secretly, that I could help. Not with money, she said quickly, as if afraid that would offend me. With understanding, with direction. I don't want to fight them. I want to stop feeling small. That night, I made tea and listened. No judgment, no agenda, just ears open. She cried. Then she asked questions. Then she left with a notebook filled with phrases I used to whisper to myself in boardrooms and bathrooms between wars. She came back a week later with 2 friends. It wasn't planned, but it grew. Not a business, not a movement, a mirror. A space where women who had been silenced, scaled down, or discarded could speak and be heard. No branding, no website. No, just a chain of whispers, referrals written in lipstick on coffee sleeves, coordinates slipped into used books. Some nights, we sat around the fire. No lessons, no strategies, just truth. One night, a woman asked me why I never retaliated against Elaine. I smiled. She didn't take anything from me, I said. She set me free. And I meant it, because what I'd lost wasn't mine anymore. What I'd kept, what I'd rebuilt here, this space of truth, of reflection, it was more powerful than anything I had ruled before. I didn't need to burn the world. I needed to help others walk through it without catching fire. They don't need revenge, I once told the group. They need freedom. It became a phrase we etched into the backs of stones and dropped in rivers, a ritual, a release. One morning I found a letter on my doorstep, hand-delivered, no return address. Inside was a simple note and a press badge. "You've been found," it said. I expected discomfort, panic, but I felt only stillness. 2 days later, she arrived. A journalist, mid-30s. Quiet eyes, no recorder, no aggressive energy. "I'm not here to expose you," she said. "I'm here because your story saved someone I love, and I think it can do that for others, too." I listened. Then I asked her one question. "Why me?" She paused, then said, "Because you didn't destroy to win. You dismantled to rebuild." I agreed to one conversation, which became 3, which became 20 pages, then 60. Then a book, not a memoir, a mirror, a quiet record of strategy, survival, and self-forgiveness. I didn't sign it with my name, just initials. I didn't do it for glory. I did it for the women who would never stand on stages or trend on timelines, for the ones who would walk into rooms and be mistaken for decoration, for the ones who'd be underestimated, overlooked, or spoken over, and who would, quietly, own everything under the surface. The manuscript ended not with triumph, but transformation, not with flame, but with fuel. The final line I wrote before I handed it off: "I didn't reclaim power. I rewrote its definition.